Once again, thank you so much for clicking on this video. This video, I promised in the previous one, Senegal video that I said I will share with you. It's long. I've worked on it, so I will leave it for you to listen to it. If you are like me and you don't know that part of history that Senegal share with France, yes, we know there are a lot of bad history between these countries, not only France, but Americans, British, and the rest. This particular one, I have no idea. If you are like me, you'll be interested to listen to it. Yesterday was 80th anniversary about the massacre that the French troops has committed in Senegal. Yes, and the president has gone into details what happened. Yes, families, please listen to it and I'll be back. Thank you so much for your time.
Commemorative de commémoration du 80e anniversaire, ladies and gentlemen, descendants of the families of the distinguished Senegalese riflemen invited, dear corps, citizens, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to extend my warmest thanks to you, my dear brother Presidents Gazouani, Azali, Barrow and Gaiman, for having kindly graced this first commemoration of the tragic story that unfolded here in Sharon 80 years ago now, despite your busy agendas. I'd like to thank all our colleagues and wish them a pleasant stay in Senegal. Through you, I salute your people. Your presence at our side is a strong symbol of your attachment to the history we share. I am deeply moved by this date and by these places, where defenseless African heroes, armed with courage, dignity and African brotherhood, were coldly slaughtered. It was a massacre. 80 years after this mass crime, the silence is as deafening as ever. Whispers from beyond the grave are ringing out in our ears, while the scale of this crime remains downplayed, and is often even denied by some of the heirs of those who committed it. On this wounded land of Thiaroye, the whistling gusts at the end of the canal still echo, as if to remind us that the horror is still there, whole and deadly. Laymen, like many of us, young and old, would ask what exactly was going on. The leaden blanket had been firmly in place for too long to erase this unfortunate episode from our history. The majority of these were Africans taken from their homeland against their will to fight or serve in the then French colonial empire. They formed the TIRAILLEURS SENEGALAIS regiment. They came from almost all the colonial territories of West, Equatorial and East Africa, which became 17 countries at the time of independence. They came from Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Comoros, Congo and Côte d'Ivoire. From Djibouti, Gabon, Guinea and Madagascar. From the Central African Republic, Senegal, Chad and Togo. Long ignored and trivialized, these skirmishers nevertheless braved the hardships to go and fight far from home. From harsh travel conditions, crammed into the holds of ships, to the battlefield, where they wore only simple, defenseless outfits, until 1943, when the Americans recovered them. The riflemen sacrificed everything. They gave of their youth, they gave of their blood, they gave of their flesh for freedom and world peace. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, despite the enormous losses suffered under Nazi barracks, the Senegalese Rifleman Regiment's effect is indisputable, and they made a major contribution to the Allied victory, including the liberation of Tunisia, the landing on Elba, the liberation of Toulon and Paris. They held their ground by fighting relentlessly, sometimes to the supreme sacrifice, to conquer a locality or hold a position. They deserve every honor, they deserve our respect, they deserve our admiration. But the rest of the story is the opposite of these immense sacrifices made in place of lodges and recognition. The order was given to neutralize those who had endured segregation in German prisons and the rigors of captivity. The irreparable happened on December 1, 1944, here in Sharon, when General Daguerreau ordered the shooting of unarmed innocents. The only fault was to demand payment. Bonuses and allowances. This was a premeditated act aimed at suppressing legitimate demands, deterring others, and perpetuating the colonial order. The crime was committed and the facts are indisputable. This is the fate that befell those who helped write the glorious history of the liberation in blood and wax. Today, as a duty of remembrance, truth and justice, we cannot forget the horror of the summary executions here at the Sharon camp. It's essential to remember history. All history without too much memory, that's what underpins the universal meaning of the values of peace, freedom and equal dignity attached to human nature. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all these reasons have strengthened our conviction that we should commemorate the anniversary of the Thiaroye massacre to pay tribute to the victims and engrave their memory. And secondly, to lay the foundations for the restoration of historical truth by putting an end to the omerta on this tragic episode, an omerta willed and maintained by the colonial authorities. By doing so, we will not be opening the door to resentment, anger, or hatred. No, what we're doing here is a duty of remembrance against oblivion. And for the truth of the facts, to discharge a moral debt to the tirailleurs and their families. That's why we have set up an international committee of independent researchers to help us reconstruct the facts and gain a better understanding of this part of our shared history with France. To facilitate research work, I have asked the President of the French Republic to make available any archival documents that could contribute to establishing the truth, and to cooperate, when the time comes, in locating graves and identifying victims. I welcome the openness of the current French authorities, who have granted our request for the truth to be revealed. And if, prior to the commemoration, members of the International Committee of Researchers visited France and held working sessions with the French authorities and those in charge of the sites where the missing archives are presumed to be kept, the research will continue after the commemoration. France has also just taken an important step towards restoring the truth, thanks to President Emmanuel Macron, who sent me a letter 3 days ago. To assume that the events in Sharon in 1944 led to a massacre. I salute his moral courage with this gesture. France accedes to an old and legitimate request for recognition. This is an appreciable step forward in the process of rehabilitating the honor and dignity of the tirailleurs victims following President François Hollande's statement at the Thiaroye Cemetery on November 30, 2014, when he saluted, and I quote, the memory of the man who wore the uniform to the French, and on which France had returned rifles. However, there are still many grey areas in this story, notably the number of riflemen executed. 2 contradictory reports from the colonial authorities speak of 35 and 70 months, while other accounts mention hundreds of dead and many wounded. According to the researchers, the requested archives will enable us to find out what really happened. Charles' tragedy provides a more faithful reading of the state of mind of a repatriated man. Exactly how many, who they are, where they come from, where they are buried, what hardships they've endured, what frustrations and humiliations they've suffered, and how much is owed to each of them. This is a complex task, which is why I am appealing to state and non-state actors in all the countries concerned, including France, to historians and researchers of all kinds, to join our efforts. To take a lucid look at this dark episode in our shared history. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, identifying the victims and pinpointing responsibilities is essential to pave the way for sincere reconciliation. This is an opportunity for me to pay a vibrant tribute to all the Africans and non-Africans who have always fought to ensure that the history of the Tirailles and the Sharon massacre is preserved from oblivion and falsification. I'm thinking of the pioneers, the politicians. I'm thinking of intellectuals, writers, poets, filmmakers, and artists. I'm thinking of people of goodwill, individuals, and corporate bodies. Without the synergy of all these efforts, the fight for justice and truth would not have flourished. But this truth has yet to be fully revealed. Passed on and recognized. We must encourage this dynamic to restore the memory and dignity of the Senegalese tirailleurs. For my part, I will initiate several measures to reappropriate this shared history with 16 African countries. Brother, first of all, a memorial in honor of the riflemen will be erected at TIRAILLEURS to serve as a place of remembrance open to all the nations from which they came, as well as to the public. Secondly, a documentation and research center dedicated to the tirailleurs will be built to preserve the memory. This center will collect archives, testimonies, and stories, while supporting research and education around this shared history. Third, streets and squares will be named after this tragic event to commemorate the sacrifice of these soldiers. In our daily lives and our collective history. Fourthly, the history of carrion will be taught in the educational curriculum. In this way, future generations will grow up with a deeper understanding of this episode from our past. Fifthly, Tirailleur Day is now fixed. The 1st of December each year commemorates the Senegal Massacre. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. The story of war and armed repression is never ordinary, and is rarely told in its entirety. This was the case with the Second World War, and above all its consequences in the colonies, which suffered unspeakable repression. Chao 1944, also in Algeria in 1945, and Hanoi and Haiphong in Vietnam in 1946. Madagascar in 1947, Douala in Cameroon, Udimbocro in Côte d'Ivoire in 1009-48949, and many other places. Each of these stories lives on in us through the memorial exercise, making us proud and grateful to our veterans. Paying homage to these skirmishers is not just about mourning our martyrs, it's about taking up their fight and leveraging it to reinvent our relationship with ourselves, with our history, and with the heirs of those who perpetrated the tragedy. It means telling the world that the Senegalese tirailleurs were not mercenaries, but defenders of universal human dignity. We have proclaimed loud and clear that this dignity, so long scorned, will never again be sacrificed on the altar of silence and oblivion. The Thiaroye massacre is a wound, but it is also a lotion that teaches us that fraternity, unity, is the refusal to forget without the most powerful weapons available to free peoples to write their future. May this commemoration, 80 years on, be more than a moment of recollection. May it be a renewed oath, an oath of justice, an oath of memory. An oath of truth, so that never again will Thiaroye and similar events be repeated in any form, anywhere else in the world. We will be their heroes today, and as we honor them, we remember that we ourselves have a duty to be true to them, true to their values, true to their struggle, and true to their vision of a fairer world. Together for historical truth, restoring the Thiaroye massacre for justice, freedom and full dignity. Thank you for your kind attention. Close your hand.
I didn't know this part of history, like I said before, and that's why I want to share it. I like history. If we don't know our history, we will never know where we are going. And I was wondering, all this baggage of history that they do not even acknowledge. It is so sad that people will work and they will do everything for you, and then when it's time to pay, you gave them bullet. My respect to this president, at least something is going to be done about this. And I will not say I'm happy. I will leave that to you. At the end of the day, the French crew will be leaving. How soon, we don't know yet. But for me, the history, I want to put it here. So those of us who do not speak French will understand what really happened 80 years ago in Senegal, the massacre that France has committed in Senegal. And if I'm one of the grandchildren, I won't be happy to be seeing France uniform on my street after what they have done. But our leaders has let them use us for so long that now you don't even know where we stand when it comes to foreign troops in Africa territories. It should be the other way around as well, because when you look at it, they were the people who went and what? Destroy, delete, take away, steal, and everything, but it is what it is, and we have to learn from our histories and change our attitude towards what is going on now and forever. Families, I will leave you here. Thank you. Please leave comment. What do you think about the message or the history that the president has read? Thank you. Credit to RTS Senegal TV for sharing this news with us. Families, I will see you soon. Bye bye.